Hey, this is Hamza Ahmed, biomedical engineering class of 22. And even though this is part two of my series, I do want to reinforce my disclaimer that the views expressed in this video are entirely my own and are not supported or endorsed by Texas A&M University. With that out of the way, let's jump into it. I'm going to quickly run through some tools that I've found exceptionally helpful for registration and that I know are pretty widely used, as well as, talk to you about what registration looks like. So the first step in, your registration journey is finding your classes. And using Howdy's Class Search at this point is the only method that I'd really recommend, especially because you can specify that you want to look only for open sections. Incoming freshmen that will be vying with God knows how many other freshmen for seats in different classes, it's important to know that whatever sections you are looking at are at least open for the time being while you plan. So once you've looked at through class search, try to identify maybe 3 or 4 classes or 3 or 4 sections for each class, and then in like a journal or in a notepad file, something like that, write down the professor, the section, and the CRN. This is going to be important for later, but for now, uh, just make sure to write these three things down. So the next step, and this is most likely going to be happening simultaneously while you're searching for classes, is you're most likely going to be looking at how difficult the professor is and how difficult the class is. And because this portion in particular takes up so much time, I wanted to make sure to provide as many resources as possible. So first and foremost, A&M is one of the few universities in Texas that actually publishes grade distributions. So I have listed the site where A&M provides its PDFs for raw distribution data, as well as some student-created sites that do a really fantastic job of presenting that GPA and grade distribution data in a little bit more of a palatable sense. This site, what it does is it provides you like a ranking of professors in terms of highest average GPA, as well as provides you like aggregate data in terms of how many students make A's versus B's versus C's, etc. This site, what it does is it doesn't necessarily rank professors, but it does provide valuable data in terms of like trends. So, for instance, how has a professor's teaching sort of performed over the past 3 years? So you can look at it, you can examine trends, stuff like that. And especially when you're looking at all of this data, it's important to not get lost in the numbers. So just focus on looking for average GPA for each section, percent of students that make A's, percent of students that make B's, and finally, look at the number of students that Q drop a course. So a Q drop is when a student, sees the writing on the wall that maybe the course isn't working out for them. Maybe they're doing a little bit worse than they were expecting. And what the Q drop allows them to do is to drop out of the class without having that grade sort of taint their transcript. So the reason why this statistic is incredibly valuable is because it provides a pretty good metric of how many students really needed to drop out of the course. I'd also suggest looking at past syllabi. You can do that by going on Howdy, going to class search, and then changing the term that you're looking at to be a term in the past. And what this does is it gives you a little bit more information in terms of how the course is laid out, in terms of how grades are conducted, how much are quizzes worth, how much are exams worth, as well as what the instructional layout for the class is. So how much time is being spent on different concepts. The last source that I'd absolutely recommend would be the r/Aggies subreddit. So there is definitely a little bit of quality control that you have to do in terms of critical thinking, but ultimately I think that having pre-existing personal testimonials definitely helps you know what to expect in terms of different classes, different professors. So looking back at earlier on, not all hours are created equal. I'd say that this as three are probably your best resources in terms of deciding, okay, so what hours are weighted differently, which hours are weighted more, which hours are weighted less. Um, and I've included RateMyProfessor on this list. I know that a lot of students use it. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan just because I don't really think that it's 100% reliable. Reason why is because there is like some sort of survivorship bias in terms of the fact that students with negative experiences are more likely to go on to Rate My Professor and complain about it than students with average experiences or positive experiences. So what I would say that Rate My Professor provides some insight on is number one, really good or really bad professors. So um, professors with 1.0s versus 4.0s, that sort of polarization indicates that the average student seems to find them either very attractive in terms of the way that they teach or very poor. So that's one aspect that I think that Rate My Professor does provide some pretty decent insight in. And number two, it again helps you sort of establish how each professor grades, how they treat their class, etc. Oof. So, last but not least, this is, I think, the strongest resource present. It's basically a interactive like planner that allows you to mix and match different classes that you've hopefully selected during our class search um, step, and it allows you to view how those classes will look on your schedule, which is important because I mean a pretty big part of your experience as a student is making sure that you have enough time to actually decompress between classes, as well as helping you decide, whether you prefer like morning classes versus night classes, etc. It also provides a really valuable resource in terms of making sure that you don't end up like really wanting classes that are presenting like time conflicts because Howdy isn't going to allow you to register for those classes in that case. So it helps you mitigate that possibility as much as. And it's nice because it also includes like a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of what the professor's average grade distribution is. So that's remarkably helpful as well. A&M tried to implement something like it in the Howdy portal, but not the best. And I'd say to stick with this one for the time being. So now that we've gone over, most of the tools that will hopefully help you look through what classes you need and decide how to sort of schedule your classes a little bit better. Uh, what I've done is I've made a really quick mock-up of, what the process looks like for actually doing this. And I've tried to size the elements in terms of the amount of time that you should expect it to take. As you can see, the registration worksheet and the registering part is definitely the least time intensive. It'll go by like that. So um, you're going to focus primarily on examining course difficulty. And the reason why I have these two circling back and forth is because let's say that you picked a couple of sections for a specific course, and upon examining the difficulty presented by either the professor or based on like a past syllabus, you decide that some of those are classes or sections that you're not exactly comfortable with. Um, you'll go back, you'll keep looking for more classes, you'll examine the difficulty again. And as you do this more and more often, the amount of time that this will take is going to shrink because you'll slowly get a feel for how different professors operate. You'll definitely hear of professors by reputation. So um, it looks a little bit daunting right now, I know, but I promise that the first scheduling session is always the hardest. It gets better after that. Don't worry. Um, So once you've, fully examined the course difficulty and you're satisfied with, the classes that you've chosen, you'll then start organizing your classes. And I've included something really important here that I think is vital to freshman course registration, which is developing backup schedules. This is so important. And ultimately, the budgeting at least 1 to 1.5 hours, that's usually going to be for your first schedule. From there on out, it's going to expand a little bit in terms of backup schedules. Um, but the reason why backup schedules are so important is because when you register for during your NSC, a lot of people are going to be registering at the exact same time. And it's highly likely that your ideal schedule, something is going to go wrong. One of the classes is going to get taken out of circulation, and you don't want to be left scrambling for an entirely new schedule as everybody else is signing up. So definitely make backup schedules. Don't go overboard with it. I'd say that in my experience, I think that the maximum number of backup schedules I ever had was three or four. Three or four. Yeah. So once you've developed all of your backup schedules, uh, you'll then go into the registration process, and hopefully you're prepared enough and it goes quickly. So with that in mind, uh, a couple of closing remarks, at least as far as what registration looks like, what you should do to like maximize your efficacy. First and foremost, registration holds in blocks. Every year, I see somebody get killed by this. Um, Always check your registration hold blocks. At least I'd say I'd say if you can, maybe check it like the day before. But one of the most common holds or blocks that stops people in their tracks from registering is that they don't have their lab safety acknowledgement signed. Um, at your NSC, they're going to talk a little bit more about this, but keep in mind that you know try to have your lab safety acknowledgement signed as soon as possible. Um, Again, have a couple of backup schedules ready, um, especially with the new version of Howdy. I know that uh, during the first phase of the rollout, which was back in fall of 2019, so 2 semesters ago, I know that I had the registration worksheet glitch out on me. So definitely to try to keep Murphy's Law in mind. Everything that can go wrong could possibly go wrong. So um, my suggestion would be to, on a separate notepad file that's open while you're registering, try to have all of the CRNs listed for all of your classes. Like I said earlier, you'll be writing down the professor, the section, and the CRN, so that should help you. Um, and a word to the wise, don't use a phone to try to register for courses right now. Howdy barely works on laptops, so um, yeah, definitely don't do it on a phone. If you do have a laptop, that is perfectly fine. But one of the things that I know I found helpful, especially in College Station where my Wi-Fi would, randomly cut out, try to have a wired connection. You don't need it by all means. Like, if you want to use normal Wi-Fi, you can. But having a wired connection at least cuts out the possibility of your Wi-Fi cutting out on you. So um, that's something to consider. So, with that in mind, I'll be closing off. I'd say that the registration process is intimidating. It really is. And I remember being terrified of it when I was a freshman too. And it's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be a little bit anxious about it. That's okay. But I really hope that this presentation didn't scare you off. I hope that this presentation provided you with some sort of information so that when you do attend your new student conference and when you do register for your classes, you do have, some tools in your back pocket. Um, so last bit of advice, relax, take a deep breath, and get planning. Fortune favors the prepared mind. With that, Hamza Ahmed, signing off.